But when Christians talk about hope, there's a lot of confusion. If you ask an average Christian, what is the Christian hope? They'll probably say, oh, it's about going to heaven. Or maybe they'll say it's to do with resurrection. And then they'll scratch their heads and say, wait a minute, what exactly is resurrection? And where exactly is heaven? What are we talking about? Can we actually believe that stuff? And even if we do say we believe in heaven or resurrection, what on earth, and I mean on earth, has that got to do with real hope in God's real world now?
There are other people who will say, well, when we read the Bible, we see that there's a hope which is for going away from this world altogether and off to a wonderful place called heaven. And we're just going to leave this wicked old world behind. So who cares about economic crises? Who cares if you don't have a job? Who cares if there are tsunamis? We're going to die sooner or later, so it might as well be sooner if we're going to a better place than this. And they claim often to find this in the Bible itself. Now, of course, the Bible does tell us about many dimensions to human life, to the life of this world, and warns us against thinking that the present world that we can touch and see and measure is all that there is. But the Bible doesn't say that in order to say that this present world is just a waste of space and time and that we're going off somewhere else entirely. The Bible has a very different vision. Some of my favourite poems in all the world are the poems we call the Psalms, sitting there in the middle of the Old Testament in the Bible. And some of my favourite Psalms are the ones which talk about what God is promising to do one day. And it doesn't say God is going to throw this world into the trash can. It says rather things like this: the field is going to exult and everything in it, the sea will roar and all that fills it, all the trees in the forest will sing for joy before the Lord, because he is coming to judge the earth with righteousness and truth. Now, again, some people go wrong when they hear that word judge, and they think that that means God is going to get really angry with the world and is going to burn it up and fry it or throw it away. But for the Hebrews writing the Old Testament, the word judge was a good thing. Imagine somebody who has been badly wronged. Classically in the Bible, we read stories about elderly people and widows who have had all their rights taken away from them, who've been bullied and oppressed and robbed, and they go to court and they say, I need justice, I need somebody to vindicate me. And eventually, if the judge is doing his job, the judge will say, I find in favour of this woman, her rights are upheld, she has her property restored to her. Now that lady's going to go out of court and celebrate and have a party because judgment has been done according to truth and righteousness. And that's what it's going to be like for the whole world. And the great story of the Bible from beginning to end is the story of God making a wonderful world, a world which then somehow, it's hard to tell how, really does go badly wrong, but of God's promise to sort it all out one day. And you can take a line straight across from Psalms like that, through passages like the book of Isaiah, which is full of great statements about God's purposes for the whole creation, for the wolf to lie down with the lamb, for the whole creation to be put back straight again, for things like the thorns and thistles in the garden to be replaced with lovely flowering shrubs. And then you can go across from those Old Testament passages to the very end of the New Testament, where the last scene in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, is not about people leaving earth and going upstairs to a place called heaven, but rather about the heavenly city coming down to be here on earth, so that heaven and earth are joined together. That is the great hope which is put before us right through the whole Bible. And actually, it's something which is there, if only we knew how to read them, in the Gospels themselves, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. Because Jesus, when he's teaching in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is not teaching us how to leave this world and go somewhere else. He taught us to pray, after all, thy kingdom come on earth as in heaven. And, he went about doing it. People often get puzzled when they read the New Testament, particularly for the first time, when in Matthew's Gospel Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, but in Mark and Luke and a little bit in John he talks about the kingdom of God. Actually, for many Jews, those were two ways of saying the same thing, And because they were often reverent about not wanting to say the word God too often, they sometimes would say heaven when they meant God. The trouble is that many Christians reading Matthew's Gospel particularly find Jesus saying things like, if you do this, if you do that, you will be called either the least or the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And because many Christians assume that the name of the game is to go to heaven, they think that Jesus is talking about a kingdom, namely a place called heaven, where you might or might not go at the end of time or the end of your life. But Jesus himself makes it quite clear in some of the very same passages that that's not what's going on. In Matthew chapter 6, right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, and it's as it were in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, if you look at how that great sermon really works and is structured, Jesus teaches us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. In other words, the kingdom of heaven is not a place called heaven where you go to escape from earth. The kingdom of heaven means the sovereign rule of heaven, which is coming to birth on earth.